Hello again, this is Dairid with another one of my basic league guides. In this guide I'm going to be talking about the basics of the lanes and how, for the most part, they're played in today's meta. I'm going to try not to go too specifically into stuff that has recently changed, and mostly the basic things that have stayed the same in each lane as far as the meta goes. I've played this game for a few years, and a couple aspects of each lane have stayed mostly the same. The lane I'm in currently is bottom lane. It is the one most bottom on the map, so it's pretty easy to know which lane that is. It is usually played as a duo lane with an AD carry, which is it's a character that scales off attack damage, and they're almost always ranged too. If you want to think of it in MMO terms, they're your hunter, or your ranged DPS that also does physical damage. It's a duo lane for a couple reasons. One is it's a pretty easy lane to gank, and AD carries aren't very inherently tanky for the most part. Not all characters scale off AD, but AD carries are pretty fragile, and so they need someone in the lane to make sure they live. And also there's a neutral objective just up the river here that is called the Dragon. Killing him gives your entire team a good amount of gold, and so you want to keep as many of those kills for yourself as possible, and having two characters down there ensures that you can contest that if they're trying to take it, and you can make sure that for the most part the only times it gets taken is for your team. So that's two of the reasons why it's a duo lane. Okay, the lane I'm in right now is the mid lane. It's usually occupied by a ability power caster, so your magic damage character. The reason why your caster you want your AP caster in here is because this lane gives a lot of experience and a lot of gold because it's a solo lane, and you want your team to have a lot of physical, magical. You want different kinds of damage, because if they can stack one kind of resistance, then it's gonna be much easier for the team to beat you. And so usually you stick your ability power character here because they're pretty safe. It's pretty hard to gank this lane from the jungle, and they're pretty safe being in this lane. And that's the basics of this lane. It's a little more complex than that, but just know if you pick a mage character, they're probably going to want you to go to middle lane, and you're going to be 1v1 versus another character, and your main goal will be to try to kill them, but that doesn't always happen. If you can out-farm them, that's just as good as killing them. Or if you can make it where you're not necessarily killing them, but you're making it where they're not able to last hit minions and stuff, that's also very helpful. And the last actual lane that I'll talk about is the top lane, which I'm heading to right now. This is occupied by resilient characters for the most part, because it's an easy lane to gank, and it's a solo lane. So you want your character to be able to get away if the jungle jumps in and starts messing you up. And there's a couple exceptions, but for the most part, it's AD characters that are pretty tanky. They're called bruisers in this game. You want to think, your melee, heavy defensive, but not quite tank characters if you're an MMO, like a Retribution Paladin or an Arms Warrior, if you're one of World of Warcraft references. And those are the kind of characters that'll be in this lane. There's a couple exceptions, but for the most part, those exceptions are really just because those specific characters counter the beefy champions that are usually in here. And then the last lane that's not really a lane is the jungle. And this is usually... There's a lot more variety in the jungle than there is in the rest of the lane. There's all sorts of characters that can jungle, and the characters that are popular in the jungle probably change the most out of any of the other lanes. And so there's really not much to say about that. Basically, they're characters there's attack damage characters, there's ability power characters, and basically what makes a good jungle character is their ability to get to a lane and gank it. So if they have CC that helps, and various other things, but there'd be a whole other video talking about what makes a proper jungle, and of all the things that have changed in the meta, the jungle has changed the most. But if you know those basics, you're probably going to be pretty safe in picking a champion knowing for your role. If you're just starting out the game, I would suggest a ranged champion. They're just a little, not necessarily easier, but the game is kind of biased towards them. Not that, melee ones are bad or unuseful, but mechanically they're just a lot easier just because you have a range. You don't have to worry about getting close to the characters, and for newbies it'll help a lot more to start out as a ranged character, and then once you get it figured out and get your mechanics down, switch up to a melee if that's the kind of role you want to play. Alright, that's it for this very short guide. Remember, comment, rate, subscribe, and see you later. Hello folks, this is Dairid. I'm going to be doing a very quick tutorial video on League of Legends. It's a pretty popular free-to-play game. It has some microtransactions, but for the most part, you can be very competitive with